I do want to ask folks to be respectful of our panelists and of each other. These panelists are not working for the City of Seattle. I'm going to ask a question about what they think should be done, but they have no policy making unless they're out there, I don't know, protesting and chaining yourself to something. They're not in charge of the city and what the city decides to do. That will be a separate panel if people are interested in that, but we wanted to start off tonight with just having a discussion about what happens when folks become homeless and how that can happen. And this really came from my being on the website Nextdoor and other social media and just seeing a lot of misconceptions, misperceptions, and some dehumanizing of folks that are dealing with the issue of homelessness. I myself was homeless as a young person and experienced that in my life, and it did affect me throughout my whole life. And you know, to be 46 years old and own a house is still pretty shocking to me, considering what I went through. So I think there's a lot of different ways that people become homeless and a lot of different ways that folks interact or don't interact with the system. And the system isn't necessarily always designed to be as helpful as we think it is. So I just want folks to keep that in mind as we go through this panel this evening. And all of our panelists are here voluntarily. We gave them some soda. That's really about it. So please treat them as the guests and amazing people that they are. First, I would like to introduce Ruth Harold, who is the Executive Director of Elizabeth Gregory Home. Ruth has been working in the nonprofit sector for 13 years, and Elizabeth Gregory Home serves single homeless women in the greater Seattle area. And I met Ruth because of my day job. I work for a foundation, and Ruth came to us with some great ideas about serving transgender women in their program. And so that's how I got to work with Ruth. And they were able to build showers in their day shelter, which, let me just say, are much fancier than mine, and are just doing some amazing work with the community. Next is Elisa, and I just met her this evening, and she is one of the leaders over at Camp Second Chance. She's been homeless. She was homeless in January of 2015, and she's been unsheltered since June of 2013. Did I get that back?
No, this year.
2016, sorry. She's going to talk about the difference about being homeless and unsheltered. Her partner is transgender, and they also have a 98-pound English Mastiff, who unfortunately is not here with us, but that would have been amazing.
She would have loved meeting everybody.
And then we have Polly Trout, Dr. Polly Trout, who's the founder of, I'm not going to pronounce this right.
Padachara Community Services.
Padachara Community Services. And I met Polly also through my job, where we had a conversation and discussion about the issues of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people and other folks trying to access services in the city of Seattle. Padachara is a faith-based nonprofit offering compassionate and respectful care to those who are suffering. And as Polly has been involved with Camp Second Chance and other homeless encampments around the city. So this is our panel for this evening, and I'd like everyone to give them a warm welcome. And I'm going to start off with a question for each of you, and that really is for you to just take a few minutes and talk about yourself, your work, and how you came to be involved in the issue of homelessness and the work around that. So why don't we start with Polly, and we'll work our way down.
Well, I've been working with people who have suffered from homelessness for about 15 years now. I have a PhD and I taught at San Diego State for a few years, but then when my older daughter was born, she's 16 now, I was taking some time off from working to stay home with the baby, but I missed teaching, so I started, I moved back to Seattle to be near my family, and so I started doing volunteer work at the University District Youth Center, helping homeless youth get their GEDs. And I found that I had a gift for connecting with these young people. Most of them came from backgrounds of childhood trauma. And I actually had two. My father was a corporate attorney, but very abusive. And so I was I was a very obnoxious, difficult teenager. Let's put it that way. And so I had a lot of empathy, like compassion for these young people who were taking their personal pain to the streets in a dramatic form. And I found that I had a real gift for meeting them, building rapport by talking about books and ideas and philosophy and treating them like human beings rather than social problems. And so because that went so well, I started a little scholarship fund so that they could go on to local community colleges, and then actually grew into my first nonprofit I founded, Seattle Education Access, which now helps hundreds of young people a year whose educations have been disrupted by poverty and trauma get back on track with their educations. So I retired from Seattle Education Access 2 years ago after 12 years of service. Because my vision and the nonprofit's vision were kind of going in different directions. They were becoming more focused on academic achievement, but I was becoming more and more focused on kind of a holistic or spiritual view of what it means to heal from trauma. And so I wanted to, because I had been doing this work for so long, I had watched young adults grow up and get, as Gunnar was talking about, achieve stability, have children, get their own homes, and I saw very clearly that the individuals who were succeeding the most were doing it because they had built community for themselves. That most people on the streets come from unsafe family environments, right? That they don't have they don't have the safety net of a safe, loving, extended family, and so when tragedy strikes, they don't have so many options, or they don't have that safety net. And so I started thinking a lot about how to help people build those social skills and build that community skills and that sense of cooperation and working together in a way that uplifted their spirits and helped them remain strong in their own sense of being dignified human beings, even though they were going through this really traumatic situation. Because when tragedy strikes, it's something you can either grow from, or it's something that you can be destroyed by, right? And so it's when people are really hurting, they really need people who are there treating them with kindness, treating them like human beings, so that to kind of help walk them through it. So I have been providing supportive services to the encampment sort of as an interfaith chaplain, helping people develop those skills and using the encampments as both a training ground to kind of get on their feet in a place that's safe, where they're not going to be raped or stabbed in the middle of the night, and then also have that be a springboard where they can go on to safe housing. So, sorry, that was a little long.
That's great, thank you. Elisa?
Yeah, so I am a freelance artist and game developer. I actually have a bachelor's of art that I got at the Academy of Art University down in San Francisco. I spent a year in Sendai, Japan teaching English, and my partner and I decided that we'd been circling the gaming industry and couldn't actually get into it on a job, and so we decided to kind of start out on our own and tried to make our own game. And we basically failed at that, and we had some contracts that were freelance contracts where basically the person who we were having the contract with went to prison for white-collar trading, and that meant my paycheck completely disappeared and I couldn't pay my rent anymore. And with a 98-pound dog, an English Mastiff is an excellent apartment dog. They're just so low energy that it's just like all they want to do is lounge around like a cat. But without a paycheck coming in and without, family to turn to, because my partner and I both have basically been diagnosed with PTSD because of trauma we've suffered from our families, that we can't turn back to them. And it was just, we tried turning to friends, and that's where I was homeless from when I lost my job until earlier this year, where we were couch surfing. We were trying to live with friends, and that was working successfully for a while, but with the finances of the families that we were living with struggling, that they couldn't really support us any longer. And so the start of this summer, we became completely unsheltered, and we were terrified and didn't know where to turn. And so I called 211, and they actually gave me the information about Camp Second Chance as an alternative to going to a shelter, because as my partner is trans, a trans woman, but with no documentation to show that she's been trying to transition. She doesn't, like, her driver's license has that big old M on it, and having a 98-pound dog, again, the shelters can't take them unless they're service animals, and that we couldn't get into a family shelter, we couldn't separate each other because my partner, I just would be absolutely scared of her safety in a men's shelter. You know, the women's shelters sometimes, without the proof, like I even remember calling up one and asking, you know, my partner is trans, will she be welcome in your shelter? And they straight up told me not without having an F on her ID for the female. And it was just, we didn't know where to turn, and Camp Second Chance was, you know, was just a boon, a blessing in our life to have some place where we could go and be safe, and, you know, like Holly mentioned, that we're not in fear of our lives, you know. Being on Myers Way, where we're actually across the street from another encampment, we're kind of seeing some of the other homelessness that's in the city, and I can feel safe with the folks that I'm staying with, that I know that with our 24-hour security that we have set up, that we do voluntarily, we rotate in, and everyone pitches in for that, and the community support that we get, you know, from Officer Weed Key comes in, you know, I feel safe being there, and it's actually helped my partner and I able to get back on our feet, and I'm happy to say that on Tuesday we're moving into a place in the Central District. You know, and that's something where if we didn't have Camp Second Chance, I don't know where we'd be right now.
Thank you.
Wow. Wow. Well, one of the first things I was hearing Gunnar say was what brought us here, and I've heard some of that. And I guess I've been in this part of the social service world for 16 years, so I'm somewhere along the line, I guess I got to update that. But I actually started off Elizabeth Gregory Home as a consultant. I'd been a director of a number of nonprofits before, and decided that, you know, I'd gone back and gotten a degree in organizational development, and I decided that was the direction I was going to go. And I had a moment that actually changed everything for me. And that was an afternoon I was working in an office there, and I had an African-American beautiful woman come back to me, and she said, I have a big pot of my family's long traditional African stew, and I have to get it to a potluck, but first I have to get it to my apartment, because it wasn't an apartment, it was a room in University District, and I can't get it on the bus. I'm like, you know, I can definitely help you, you know, what's the stew for? And she said, well, I'm allowed to be a non-matriculated student at Seattle Pacific. And if it wasn't, she said, I don't have money to buy the food. I don't have a kitchen to cook in. And if it wasn't for this place, I wouldn't be able to make the stew. And because I can't, I get to be like everyone else. And that was the moment. That was the moment. I still get the chills thinking about that. Like, she got to be like everyone else. And that's what I am drawn to in the mission that I work with, which is the humanity of every person that we serve. And we serve anyone who identifies as female, and there's no checking of any ID. I hear that kind of thing, and it makes me cringe, but I hear the stories from our trans women day in, day out, you know, that the world sure isn't changing at a very fast pace, but I'm really excited that it has where we are. And it wasn't that way when I started there. It was not inclusive practices that I was observing. And so we've changed the culture. And so I feel really hopeful, regardless of what's happening in our communities around this. I have a lot of hope that there's people like in this room tonight, I'm certain of it, you know, who really, you know, have heart and want to see things change. And so one of the things that we use as a guiding, so we have a drop-in day center. And right now it's Monday through Friday. Eventually we hope that our next goal is 6 days a week. We are co-located in a church, which makes that 7th day a little tricky when we get there, but let's get to 6 days first. And so I look at the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and until you cover safety and physical needs, you can't leap up that ladder and suddenly overcome homelessness. And that is probably, you know, one of the most frustrating things that I experience in talking to people in the community who just say they just need to get a job. And so, you know, if I had two of the folks that work with me who are, you know, my coworkers, were formerly homeless. And when people describe what that's like, especially if you have a shelter, and I'm guessing that's probably even true in some of the encampments, it's noisy. It's definitely very noisy in the shelters. People are sick. There's people coughing around you. There's people stepping over you. There's people who are fighting. There's people who are stealing your things. One woman told me she was at Hammond House the other night, and somebody came in and pulled the person in the top bunk above her. It was the police, and they were arresting her in the middle of the night. And so people are exhausted. So we like to look at ourselves as providers that are client-centered design. So what do the clients need? So when I started, there was, and this is pretty common at other day centers, is that you cannot rest, you cannot sleep, you're there to do business, right? And so I was like, for crying out loud, people are like tired. And so we started a MAC program in the hallways, because we are a really small center. We were 950 square feet, and then we did a capital project, and now we're double that, which I was doing the math, I believe that's about 1,900 square feet, and which included adding the showers. And so we started allowing people to rest on the floor, and that wasn't very satisfactory. And so now the church is amazing, but now we have a sleeping room, and it's fabulous. We have 9 mats in there. Women are very respectful, and they're clean. They clean their mats. We're always looking for sheets. Sometimes they know we'll be asked, what kinds of things can you do? Hey, you have spare twin sheets? Turn them into our day center. Because we launder them after every time somebody leaves, and so they're getting rest. They're doing, we do food, and we're teaching all about how to. All the food we get is food bank food. I mean, that's stuff. We get the same food that the food bank does. And so how to teach people how to eat nutritiously, from the food that you get from a food bank. If you looked at our website, we still have, one of the videos on there is what the people say is like, this is family. We come here and it feels like family. And I think that's because we do listen to, what do you need? What do you need? And so then we provide them, because we've expanded, so now we'll be able to add more health services. We already have someone who does referrals, who comes in once a week from YWCA, does advocacy in that way. But we thought we were going to have Dr. Kathy, so now we're looking for a different position, because she said she's a pediatrician and doesn't feel comfortable. She retired. But somebody, and what that would be about, it's not like we're not a medical center, but what our folks love is individual attention. And having a blood pressure, which is huge, because some of our folks, we've had several people since I've been there who've stroked, and doing that, having little bottles of water, to nurture them, and then say, what do you need? And we certainly can't, because we served 642 people last year. This year we'll be well over 700 individuals for like over 11,000 visits in this little tiny day center, right? And people really need to be seen, to be paid attention to be seen, and to be asked. So we ask in our sort of informational interviews, it's sort of like, so what do you need? So of course housing, we're pretty darn good at helping people get housing when there is none. So we really triage all of those. But the most important question we ask is, what are your hopes and dreams, right? And when we first started asking that, people looked at us like, I had people burst into tears, like, what are you talking about? Because so many people lost that. And so that's a lot of what we're about. So our core values, and everything we do as staff, everything we're integrating it into our board practices, and everything when there's plenty of conflicts when you're working with a population that is, hungry and tired and sometimes angry and lonely. So our core values are RICE, like race. It's respect, inclusion, community, and empathy. And if anything we're doing violates one of those values, we are not walking our talk. So, so when we're having, disagreements amongst staff, it's like, okay, what's going on here? And client to client, and staff to client, and board to board, board to staff. So we really try to make our values direct everything that we do as a system. And I forgot to mention that actually we were started as transitional housing. We do have a transitional house that houses 8 women and anyone who identifies as a woman, because we do have trans women in our house too. And so we apply those same principles. We work very intensively with them, and it's so important for people to have that opportunity. You know, that I know I'm jumping ahead of myself. I know it, but to be able to think about people with more transitional housing, that opportunity to get intensive support, not just be put in transitional housing and left until you find a place, but to be there and work very intensively with folks around what they can do to move to the next step. You know, I think the community's missing that piece. So that's it for me.
Thank you. So I want to go on to a question and talk a little bit, and Elisa talked about this, and each of you have mentioned it, but, you know, if you could talk a little bit about, you know, how do people become homeless? You know, there is the, like, mantra of, like, why don't they just get a job, or, you know, can't you just go stay with someone, or, you obviously you spent your money on something else and not your rent, you know, is some of the missed stereotypes that we hear. So I wonder if any one of you want to jump in and just start answering that question.
The number one cause of homelessness is poverty. You know, it's people who it's a lack of affordable housing coupled with a lack of living wage jobs. Most homeless people are working. Of the ones that aren't working, most are either disabled or children or in school. So another big cause of homelessness is drug addiction and alcoholism. I'm not going to downplay that. That's very real. A lot of people who are homeless struggle with that. But a lot of people who are using drugs and alcohol on the streets were not the day they became homeless. You have no idea how many times I've heard a woman say, it wasn't until after I got raped that I started using meth because I was afraid to go to sleep. So, LGBTQ people are overrepresented in homelessness because they're more likely to be disowned by their families, so they're less likely to have that safety net of a safe family. Domestic violence victims overrepresented again, no place safe to be in the home, so you know, so that they lose their housing. And then also people of color are overrepresented because they are also facing additional barriers to a living wage job and affordable housing.
I don't know if you have anything else to add from the folks you've worked with.
I do. You know, definitely people who come out of lifelong poverty. That's one section of our population. Another section of our population is just as you were saying, Polly, you know, about drug addiction, chronic mental illness. That's another one. You know, that's definitely brings some folks down. And then there's probably 25%, maybe that's high, but of the folks that we serve who are what we call, someone just came in who's deer in the headlights. And that is the person that's me and you. That is the person that never expected that they would ever in their wildest dream ever end up homeless. And sometimes that's a direct result of domestic violence situation. And that domestic violence situation may not be about physical, you know, kinds of, as people conjure up, but controlling all the finances. And so I cannot tell you how many people I've worked with in the 5 years that I've been there who have ended up being homeless, who lived in upper middle class homes that suddenly had nothing. And sometimes, you know, then there's the shame factor that comes with that. You know, even if they did have people in their lives, they couldn't bear the idea of telling their family members that, you know, that they had not only failed in their image or their minds, you know, in their relationships, but also, you know, that they ended up on the streets. And so helping those folks that, you know, that never and ever expected, and helping them walk through the system is definitely a certain percentage of folks that we deal with.
Having a health crisis is also a reason why a lot of people end up without housing. And that actually happened to me 2 years ago. I was a single mom, working a nonprofit job, living paycheck to paycheck, and I needed hip replacement surgery, which is 3-month recovery without being able to work. So I had to give up my lease, pack all my stuff up, go to double up with my kids at my sister's house, have the surgery, have the recovery, then move into a new house. But it's really only because of the grace of God that I had like a sister to turn to. Right? Not everybody has that.
Was it health? It could be a car accident that causes all the health problems.
So, Elisa, I wondered if you could talk a little bit about Camp Second Chance, and you know, it didn't start in Myers Way. It actually moved from another location. If you could just talk a little bit about that, and just a little bit about how it works. You talked about the security, and about how many people are living there right now.
So Camp Second Chance, from what I understand, was started by some campers who had been part of some other camps, including Tent City 3, which is managed by Share, and there were some things that were happening at the management of that camp that basically these specific campers were having differences of opinion of, weren't liking not being able to have transparency of what was being done with monetary donations. And so they decided that it would be a good thing to go and start their own encampment, their own self-managed encampment, where it was completely transparent to every single camper there what was being done with the donations, and that every single camper has an equal say in the operations of the encampment. That was something that they wanted to have. They wanted to be able to say in their own lives what they could do with their own lives. And so they started that in April of this year, and were hosted at the Riverton Park United Methodist Church in Tukwila. And Pastor Jan was really great. In fact, she's been continuing to support the camp. We go down to that church because that's our closest shower right now. So that's where a lot of our campers still go to shower, is basically in Tukwila at the Riverton Park.
You can go to Delridge Community Center, I told David.
Okay, I'll let people know. And, you know, so we pay monthly duties. Each camper pays, so we can put that money towards gasoline that we purchase to run the generator, so that we have power to charge our laptops and our cell phones, so that we can, like, I work from home. My partner actually goes to school online at Portland Community College, and so being able to do that without having to go to the library and sit in the library all day, you know, and especially with a lot of the libraries being closed on Sundays and having short hours on Fridays and Saturdays, you know, that having the generator in camp. And so we paid the dues towards getting that, and more recently we've been making sure that we're paying for propane for the heater in our common room. We have basically we have a TV room, we have a separate computer room where we've got the big 10 by 20 carports set up. We had a sizable donation that helped us get some pallets and plywood down, and so we worked together as a community to build that. This week I actually helped to build a new security shack, because that windstorm that we had, that was fortunately the only casualty we had was our security tent. You know, none of our personal tents came down. And, you know, we have roles in the camp, such as I'm actually a kitchen coordinator, so my job is bringing in when people show up with food donations, such as overflow from the food bank, or we have one gentleman who works at Winco, and so he brings some of the bakery cast-offs, you know, maybe a cake that wasn't decorated just right, so he'll bring that. And so I bring that in and make sure that the rats don't get it and things like that. And, you know, it's about half of the campers there have day jobs. I know one gentleman works downtown at a grocery distribution center, you know, so sometimes he'll bring home like peppers and things and whatever. And then there's there's one who basically goes off to work almost every day, and he paints houses and things like that, you know. So there's quite a few folks that do work. One of our other campers who recently got a job, she worked in Bellevue basically at a daycare facility. That was one of the benefits, is that working there, she got daycare for her son while she was at work. So that was something that allowed her to be able to get housing outside of the campus, to be able to get that job and to save up in order to get into the apartment. And so that's, you know, everyone is doing something, and we're all pitching in, you know, for our own community. And yeah.
Thank you. So I want to talk a little bit about you've addressed some of the I want to talk a little bit about the barriers about people becoming housed, and I think, you know, we talked about poverty, but like concretely, you know, what is it that folks need to go through to even get on a list? Is there even a list anymore? You know, like we've seen cuts to human service work, we've seen cuts to housing. We're having a conversation in the city of Seattle about mandatory affordable housing. We're looking at upzoning in different neighborhoods, that even if that goes through this year and all that, we're not gonna see the outcome of that for a number of years. So what are some of the things that the folks that you work with or folks that you're living with go through to try to get housing?
Well, I'll say a few things about that. One is, one of the other populations that are overrepresented by homelessness are people who are coming out of the criminal justice world, and it is very hard to get any kind of housing if you have a record. It's also along the same lines if you have a history of evictions, which many of our folks do. So we work there's a great program, and we're trained up to be able to support folks because they needed people to support them, so we have volunteers and staff. It's called Landlord Liaison Project, and it can help folks who have those kinds of issues but do have at least a certain degree of, you have to have some income, but they will vouch for that person for a year with the landlord, and then we help support that person in their journey, to getting permanently housed and remaining housed there. Boy, oh boy, it is. One of the things about housing lists, when it comes to Section 8 vouchers and it comes to the Seattle Housing Authority or any other rent housing, it doesn't matter. Those lists are really long, and a lot of our folks, we try to bring people into reality and say those lists can be, 3 years, 5 years, 6 years, and it doesn't matter if they're disabled or elders or, whatever. It just really doesn't matter. And so, what we have to look at is step by step. And I already mentioned transitional housing, but the other thing is there's lots of places that a lot of folks aren't aware of that are classified as permanent housing that aren't the ideal next step that some of our women hope to go into. And yet, it is a room that they have, with usually their own bath, toilet and such, but then they share showers and cooking facilities. And so there's a number of places like that, but you have to hook up with places like us. What our city and county are doing, they're looking at coordinated entry, which means it's complicated, and it hasn't hit us quite yet, but it means that everything has to go through one pipeline, and I think that sounds like a great idea in terms of tracking people. It's a terrible idea, and because they still do this vulnerability assessment, and so if they don't think that you're vulnerable enough, then you go way down on the list. And so for our very highly vulnerable people, that might be useful, but what about the other people who've been waiting for years, to get into a housing situation? So those are some of the issues that we deal with on a daily basis.
So are you talking about the navigation center when you're talking about the one point of access?
The one point of access, right, coordinated entry. Yeah.
There's a number of sites around the county that are being set up as these coordinated entry sites.
Right.
But none on the west side yet.
Right. Yeah, it's complicated. It's very complicated because you have to do two tiers of assessments, and so we hope that we will be sanctioned as a place that can do the first tier anyways before we send them on. But it's that many more hoops to get through. So getting housed, you have to be really creative. That's what I think.
Yeah, there's not nearly enough subsidized or low-income housing for the need, and there's not enough market rate housing for low-income or working families. The work I do with the homeless camps I do as a volunteer. My day job is I'm a caregiver for elders, and I'm a single mom with 3 teenagers. They're 18, 16, and 14. So my take-home pay is $3,600 a month for the family of 4, which is not a lot in King County. We've been living in Renton for the last 2 years. When we moved into this house 2 years ago, landlord said, I really want a long-term tenant. I'm like, great, because I don't want my teenagers to have to change schools again. So for the last 2 years, we've paid rent on time every month. 18 days ago, he said, sorry, I'm selling the house. I'm having a financial crunch. You have to be out by the end of the month. So every single day, I've been looking at all of the ads and applying for housing, but it's not possible to get housing in my income bracket for 4 people in 20 days in King County. And my younger one has been crying every night. She doesn't want to have to change schools again. So we're all going to be couch surfing starting Sunday. I have first loss deposit. I have good credit. I have a college education. I'm very confident, not vulnerable person. But most of the apartments that I'm looking at, they want me to be able to prove that the rent will be less than 1/3 of my income. That's $1,200 a month. where we can't get a 3-bedroom for $1,200 a month. We can't even get a 2-bedroom, and I can't put myself and 3 teenagers in a 1-bedroom. So that's how this is how it is.
Thank you. I'm wondering,
If you have that problem, think of what.
Right,
Yeah.
People.
Exactly.
Computers and cell phones.
yeah.
Right.
So I think the other issue, and this would be hopefully a future panel that we'll do, is to talk about the issue of drug addiction and substance abuse. But I do want to talk a little bit about that because I do think that, like you were saying, Polly, is that for some folks that is a coping mechanism. And that people, are sometimes self-medicating from the trauma that they're experiencing. And we know that we've seen vets come back with PTSD, folks who have had childhood trauma. And, one of the issues that we've seen, or I've seen with housing, and it's interesting because Camp Second Chance, when I first got to Seattle, which was a couple of years ago, Nicholsville was here. And I was only here, we had only moved here for the last, I think, 2 months that it was here. But at first, I actually thought it was an Occupy site, because I actually was in an Occupy encampment in Boston. And some of our campers in Occupy were folks that were dealing with homelessness who didn't want to be in the shelter because they had to be sober. And they weren't at a place yet to be there. So I'm wondering, what does that look like for somebody who's dealing with a substance abuse, drug addiction, and is not quite in a place, or that can't even get into a detox? And what does that look like for them to even try to get sheltered or housed or even emergency shelter? And that, for anybody on the panel.
There definitely are places that will, not everybody has the same sobriety limitations. And so, so you have to look at that. To get into our transitional house, they have to have at least 3 months of sobriety. And part of that is, and they can't be observably high or drunk when they come to our day center, and they can't bring any drug paraphernalia or alcohol in. And what's beautiful is, that's for the safety of all. And so when people do violate that and are like, what is the big deal? Then our other folks that are there say, it is a big deal because this is one place I can come that I know it will be safe and it will be okay. And so, I think that they've had some success. There's the McDermott place that's up in Lake City, with places where anybody, people who are chronic inebriates, as that would be their term, as well as, addiction at whatever level, that folks can live together. Sometimes my own take on that is it feels a little bit like leper colony a little bit, and I'm not sure that they're, like there's no effort because they figure, just as long as you're contained in drink, that's okay. I would like to, I'm all about, people being given opportunities and chances and choices, so I may be speaking out of turn about, maybe more services are available than you would think. It is a tough nut to crack. Like our folks who are addicts, it is tough to, to get people where they want to get help. And then when they do want to get help, getting that detox bed, getting that placement is, we had somebody who, our healthcare for the homeless advocates was really excited because she got a placement for somebody that they could get a bed in 6 weeks. And this person was like,
6 weeks.
I am a heroin addict, in 6 weeks, I can't, what am I going to do? Between now and then. And so it's so futile. It's so hard to get. We started, it's called Women Coming Home, and there's an AA meeting that was started 2 days a week that's upstairs from us. But again, it's I think it becomes part of a lifestyle, and also it's a coping strategy in that way. It may not even be induced by trauma, but if you are homeless, it is inherently traumatic. And so sometimes, people just say, I need to check out. And so it's endemic and it's challenging, and it's not everybody. That's the other thing I like folks to know is that everyone that's homeless is not an addict. But those who are addicts face an extra barrier, to get placed. And sometimes when they do get placed, we've had folks, of ours who finally got that housing, and then they trash the apartment. It's a challenging situation. When the addiction is still, alive. So it's hard.
So I want to stop and take questions from the folks that are here, and we're going to do that for about 5-10 minutes, and then I do have a closing question I want to ask the panel as well. So anyone have questions? Yes?
Yeah, I'm a 20-year resident of Myers Way, and we've been dealing with the homeless problem for the last year or two, and it's been really bad. I can go Second Chance. The first day you guys came there, your so-called security guard came up to one of my neighbors and elbowed him because we were taking pictures of the vehicles along Myers Way, just basically for making sure that, you know, parking regulations and everything else are done. Anyway, one of you guys came in and frickin' elbowed us, and so that doesn't make a good first impression. I feel for you people. I want to see you guys get homes and everything, and I'm glad you're getting one here soon. But I guess my big question out of all this is Camp Second Chance seems to be the lesser of a problem, but you're also a magnet for all the other homeless living across the street. We had the problem almost solved before Camp Second Chance came there. And nothing would make us happier if you guys could all get homes and just be gone, and then we'll deal with the rest of the problem because they're easier to deal with because they're a known problem with the drugs and all the antics that are going on. I had a guy take a knife on me just about a month ago. Anyway, my question is, out of the people at Camp Second Chance, how many have found homes so far? What's your success rate? You know, you're helping the people, and I understand you want safety, and I can't agree. We want safety in our community, and we don't feel safe. I mean, how many people have actually found homes?
And we were actually just discussing that today. Out of the campers that we have probably about 30 to 40% of our campers since we've been on Myers Way. There have been 2 separate couples besides myself who have moved on to housing, and then one of our other campers has moved on to the Othello Tiny Home Village, and his son has basically the Breach folks from Seattle helped him get on a Greyhound so he could go to Florida to live with some friends. So there were 6 campers before myself and my partner, and yeah, so we're about 40% right now, and that's just within, you know, since July that we came onto Myers Way.
So it sounds like 8 then?
Yeah.
And when Michelle and I did go visit the camp, and I believe there was a plan to eventually go back to Tukwila.
Right, we have been invited by Pastor Jan at Riverton that, you know, if we don't wind up with hosting it at some other church or something like that, we can go back in January to Riverton at least for 3 more months, because I understand that with a lot of the encampments that they try and have a rotation of 4 churches that they can rotate throughout the year and only have to move about every 3 months. And, you know, the Myers Way was absolutely our last resort as far as where we could go. We had been trying since I had joined the camp, trying to find some other church to host us. And, you know, and every single camper I know, we absolutely regret what had happened on our first move day. From what I understand, that, you know, I wasn't actually watching what was happening, but I do know that we try and reach out to, you know, the community and things like that. And I personally regret that there was any, you know, altercation that happened, you know. And like I said, I don't know the specific details of it, but.
Well, no one reached out to our community when you guys moved in. You just appeared.
We're going to move along to some other questions. So I'm going to take one here from Amanda, and then I'll go over here.
Hi, I want to thank you all for being here and speaking to us. I definitely fluctuate between frustration with homelessness and the homeless in general, and utter compassion for the situation that people find themselves in. And my question is I feel like there are a lot of good folks doing good homeless work across the city. A lot of well-intentioned people. And my perception is, and I would kind of like you guys to either dispel this or hide this, but I have friends who started their own homeless, it's like a space kind of similar to this up on Aurora. And they basically open up doors to homeless people to come in. They have laundry, they have a communal kitchen, they have just a hangout space, they have a library, like just for people to come and rest and just, you know, be human. And one of the things that they found to be a real barrier for them was funding. And what they had expressed to me was that there are so many agencies doing this work. There are so many different nonprofits that are well-intentioned, very compassionate, that it actually thins out the pie. There's actual competition for these funds between groups that are doing things. And so there's a lot less collaboration. there's a lot less community within the community to service people. And I'm just wondering, what do you guys find as the barriers to doing this work? Where are you finding your challenges in to be able to help more people?
I think that there is too much competition, and so there's no point in having your own nonprofit unless you're filling a very specific niche. But I also think that sometimes when you have a single large bureaucratic nonprofit with a lot of power and they stop being responsive to the needs of their constituents. I've been a pretty vocal critic of Share Wheel and Nicholsville. I think that Scott Morrow, the guy that started them, had good intentions, but that those organizations have become autocratic, and there's a lot of problems. So I think you have to have a good balance between efficiency in the system, but also accountability and a feedback loop so that the nonprofits are actually responding to the given needs. I think a big problem with a lot of the large traditional nonprofits that serve the homeless, like Union Gospel Mission, is that they were originally designed, their programs were originally designed in the late 19th century to serve adult men who are alcoholics. And their program is kind of rigidly ossified, and they haven't changed with the times, so they don't know how to help trans people, and they don't know how to help youth. They don't know how to help families, and they don't know how to help people of color. Because they have this idea about how things are supposed to go, and they don't sit down and ask people what they need. And, Elizabeth Craig Rome is a great organization. There's a lot of really great organizations, but we need to have some sort of, and the system is very messed up for a lot of different reasons.
So the follow-up to that is, how do we fix it?
We're getting there. Hold on.
One thing that I would say about I have a similar but very different, all at the same time. And so, for example, with Share Wheel, now they're being held accountable. They now have a fiscal sponsor, which is Capital Community Services, to make sure that the monies are spent properly. And they also have, they're getting some support for care management, case management through Low Income Housing Institute. And so I think that that's a great example of how, there's many conversations, and now us little guys are coming to the table too, because, we are in the communities and we aren't the big guys. And you know what? The truth is that there is not enough government funding. So anybody thinking that that's a solution, that is not going to be the solution. We don't have any government funding right now. We did have some King County money, and guess what? It just went away overnight. And so if you count on any grant money, frankly, then that's soft money. And so you have to realize, but you have to be crystal clear about what your mission is and what your target is. And I have, the other thing is it's my job, as leader of my organization, to find out, what's going on in those other organizations. And so I just had a conversation last week with the Millionaire Club, and I had a certain idea of what they did, and that's not what they're doing. It's not, they aren't just bringing the drunk, indigents, and giving them day jobs. And so they have 46 transitional housing beds that people, and then they have more jobs available than they do people to take the jobs. And those are jobs that are like in the service industry. It's really varied, and I'm going, holy cow. And then I talked to some of our women, and it's also, it's still larger, like 80% men, but that's shifting. And so I think that there's a lot of incredibly, hardworking agencies out there, and we need to keep having conversations. And it's really expensive to operate. It just is. We only have 5 staff, and when I started, we had 2. And so, so we've been very deliberate in looking at how we build onto what we get. And I think one of the hardest things for some of the agencies that have been around a long time was that when land was fat, that they kind of had all the staffing. It's much harder to go from here to here than it is from going from here, to slowly building it out. But you have to have a really good board, and you have to have lots of people who are willing to roll up their sleeves and look at the creative ways of combining not only the dollars that come in, but how to coordinate volunteer and pro bono efforts as well.
Thank you. I just want to say I agree with all of that, and we do need more more tax money, and that's a big problem, so.
Right here, you had a question?
When you were saying how we're disorganized, if you look at the city level, there's meetings going on all over King County and Seattle. They're just trying to, just, what's happening? Who's doing what? What is it called? I mean, so we're still very disorganized. You know, I wasn't going to comment, but with the incident for the first day when Camp Second Chance came to an area that they then moved from, and I've heard at several meetings where the camp security guard came out and attacked some of the neighborhood people. I was there that night. Pastor Janet asked me, and Mike Ramos, who's head of the Church Council Greater Seattle, asked if I would go, take them a dinner, and say welcome to West Seattle, which we did. And actually, they said, well, there's these people out there that were taking pictures of my car and the license plate and of me. And I and another guy who was not part of the camp walked down there to talk to them. And that was when, first of all, not a security guard, it was another community person, got hit and not even thinking hit back. But I went down just to ask, why are you taking pictures of the cars? I was clueless. And I was told that, well, we're returning these in to the police and filing a complaint of you're aiding and abetting in criminal behavior, which means a police record. And this man, other than was a community person, said, and I'm not saying that the other person, in their mind, I'm sure they feel very clear as to what it was. That was where mine was. That's what I experienced. So, and I know that you can have two people look at the same situation and walk away with a totally different report. So, I understand that. So I'm not questioning anybody else's interpretation. I'm just saying that was what I experienced. And so anyway, that was that.
Thanks.
I wanted to mention that when you were talking about the criminal activity and the challenges of getting housing, I've been trying and trying. 1/3 of Americans have some sort of criminal record. Whether you could have been excused or maybe charges dropped and all of that, but we've had 1/3 of us have had brushes with the law, which is really challenging. And it's the cost of getting in by the time you pay application fees, credit checks, first and last month's rent, and then coming up with just all of the other things. It takes minimum $5,000 to get into no place. But you can't even get into that, and as you said, because if your salary is too much to more, more than 1/3, say. There's just so many hurdles, and I've been trying for weeks now, trying to get housing for some people who are homeless, living in cars, and single women, and but they have a dog also, and they can't get in because one of the dog, but also just because of how much money it takes. It's just prohibitive. I don't know how we do it. The other thing when you mentioned on the...
I'm going to actually, we have some other folks with questions,
Okay.
and we don't have much more time.
I just want to say the irony is that we have an opioid epidemic and King County Detox Center is closed. Go figure.
Rhonda?
So I'm just curious because I don't read every single thing because I just get depressed about it. But I don't think I have to read everything to know that we have our problems in this city. And I'm just really struck by how much wealth there is in the city, and yet at the same time we have such a contrast with this growing, what I think is a growing homeless population. So, there's examples, I think, in Utah and some other places around the country where they have been able to tackle it. And I know it's a complex situation, but I'm just wondering, what have you guys, read about, and what have you learned from those success stories? And is any of what is happening where there is success, is that being applied here in this city or in this county at all? I'm just curious about that.
We're going to go here, and then we'll come to your last question.
Yeah, so one of our allies, Denise from Love Wins Love, has actually been pointing out to us Opportunity Village in Eugene that we've been really interested in. And so what Opportunity Village was a homeless community similar to ours that basically asked Eugene for permission to be on city land in exchange for improving the land as a park, as a public park. And They didn't ask for any funding from the city or anything, they just asked for permission to be on that land. And so they built a tiny house village and maintained that park and did their own private fundraising and have actually been able to purchase their own land and are now building Emerald Village, which will be tiny houses that will be owned by their occupants. That the folks can move up from Opportunity Village into Emerald Village and actually own those houses. And that to me is just kind of like a light in the fog, you know, that it's just like if Camp Second Chance could go on to do that, that we would jump at that chance, you know. And so I think that's one of the things, and I've been hearing some of the things, like I know that there's a new tiny house village besides the Othello one, but I haven't been hearing a whole lot about what's been going on with those. And so it's just hearing some of the success stories about, like Utah, like you mentioned, and about Opportunity Village or Diversity Village in Portland and things like that. And it's like, yeah, we would love to be able to do some of those programs.
We'll take this question here.
I went to the Barbara Cokie and Associates, was it June 8th, Path Forward, Best Practices thing. It's a 2-hour PowerPoint and video if anyone wants to watch it. And that's Seattle's plan, or at least it was the introduction of it. And I think it was September 8th, there's a follow-up. And so that's the team that they sent around to San Francisco, Vegas, Houston, and I can't remember a couple others. And so they do have a plan. This is what's working in all of those cities. So San Francisco has navigation style. I mean, there's all different terms like, you know, low barrier, come as you are. You know, you can educate yourself on the terminology of it, but it's a lot to plow through. And I've been going to a lot of these meetings, so it's still a learning curve. But there are absolutely, we do know what to do. It's just, when are we going to do it and how? So that's the way I feel about it. It's very frustrating to watch. Things that are going right is great, but things that are not going fast enough, like Hope Soldiers is doing the addiction part, and it's a gal that basically, I think she got off the streets. She had a story like Ruth, what you were talking about with someone finally asking her what her dreams were, or, you know, just like, oh, I hadn't just gotten past like an hour from now, you know. So those are the type of things that are happening, but that's just one gal with her one little thing up in Everett, and we're hoping to get more of those for the addiction opioid thing, because that's kind of taking resources away from people that just sort of fell on that level, you know. So there's that weird juxtaposition of all that nobody's heads and hearts are wrapped around yet, and you're seeing it. You can listen to Ron and Don talk, and you can listen to NPR, and it's just this wave of people not quite getting each side of the story, you know. So I think it's time to get something together and make it work in every community. So that's the hard part. But we know what to do. It's just how do we make that happen and fight for it in your community. Yeah.
Randy, you're going to be my closer. You only got 1 minute because I have one last question for our panel.
I just want to respond to your question and some of what you touched on. My name's Randy on Red Street. I live in the South Park neighborhood. I own a house there. Just bought a second house there as a rental property and Blythe. And I was very supportive of Nicholsville when they were down on Highland Park Way or whatever it is. And I organized a tour from South Park residents and invited them to come speak at our neighborhood association to dispel some of the myths, because there is some really misconceptions starting to show up on the listserv. And so I'm supportive of a well-run camp like Camp Second Chance. And I would say we are one of the wealthiest cities in the wealthiest nation on the planet. And there is no reason we couldn't build 5,000 units. There's like about 5,000 people homeless in King County, in Seattle, King County. There's no reason we couldn't build. We have the money in the city from all the taxes and everything that we pay in. It takes all of us contacting our elected officials every month saying, build this housing now, prioritize the budget. I'm speaking as a citizen. You're supposed to represent me. This is what I want above everything else. And if they started to get that kind of coordinated message from everywhere in Seattle, we would have 5,000 units of housing within 5 years or less. And it's that we, as citizens, have not roared loud enough, and not enough of us have roared often enough to to let the elected officials know this is what we want, more than another traffic circle or, you know, some study for God knows what the city does. And so we are one of the wealthiest cities in the wealthiest nation on the face of the earth, and of course we have the money. You know, so get busy with your emailing and your phone call, find out who your elected representatives is, and let them hear from you every month. You say, it's been another month, how many housing units have you built? What's the plan? When's the first groundbreaking? What do you need from me? Because maybe they need you to show up and testify at a city council meeting. Maybe they need you to invite them to your neighborhood association, maybe whatever, you know. And that's really where the power is in the hands of the people. And it means we haven't yelled loud enough. That would be my 2 cents.
Thank you, Randy. So our last question for the evening to our panelists is, what should the city of Seattle be doing right now to address the issue of homelessness? I know, I'm going to leave you with this giant question.
I think building more housing as quickly as they can and not pushing homeless people around and wasting resources doing that unless they have someplace better to be.
Thank you. Elisa, do you have any suggestions for the city of Seattle, for the mayor? We could tell him right now on the blog.
You know, I think definitely the pushing people around the sweeps that we've been hearing about. I'm fortunate enough not to have to have gone through one, but giving us a specific place to be, whether or not that's housing or if that's specific land like Opportunity Village, it's something, you know, don't just brush us under the rug. It's, you know, come out and talk to us and actually see that, yeah, you know, I'm a person, my partner's a person, everyone I live with in that camp is a person and deserves to have the exact same rights that everyone else does. So.
Thank you. Ruth?
Well, this is a little more generic to everybody, and including the people who work and make decisions in the city of Seattle. And what I heard, and people clap for you, was we used the word we. And what I did hear when you were making a comment was you people. And so the more that we distance ourselves from those people, which I think that the bureaucracies, that's pretty easy to do. We have this homeless problem. We have these people who have issues. And so I think that digging in deep and looking at, including like the smaller community-based ones, all of them, you know, and finding out, like kind of doing that deep dive about what's happening inside and how do we shore that up. And then I think that, you know, they really, I mean, New York for many, many years, I don't know how it's working now, but, you know, they had rent control. And, you know, I know people who still have rent-controlled apartments. And so, you know, we need to do something like that because a lot of people that we see end up homeless because they were making, you know, the $15 to $20 an hour job, and there's no place that's affordable to live that's within commuting distance of where they work. Another thing the city can do, please, is make public transportation cheaper for people according to their income. I mean, I think that is, you know, transportation is huge. And we have to pay, you know, we distribute bus tickets, but we have to pay for them. We have to pay, you know, 1/3 of the cost. And this year already we've given out almost 12,000 bus tickets so people can get around. But, you know, if you look at, you know, even if you were disabled, you still have to pay $1 a ticket. And when you have $197 a month that you get through aging, blind, and disabled, you know, think about how far that goes for a month, right? It's pretty discouraging. So I think making just those kinds of things, like make transportation available, make it free, you know, free for folks at a certain, you know, yes, there's going to be people that abuse the situation, but if you want to end this problem, make it an affordable city that people can actually survive in you know, the housing that's available.
I want to thank you all so much for sharing your stories and answering our questions and being available this evening. This is not the end of the discussion for our neighborhood. I mean, this discussion's been going on way before me and will go on after me as the chair, but I really appreciate you being here this evening, and I appreciate everyone's point of view that they brought to this conversation as well. If you have other topics or ideas or discussions you'd like HPAC to host, please let me know. hpacchair@gmail.com.